All right, for example 2, let's check it. So our domain looks like it starts at -6 with an open circle, and then it ends at +5 with a closed circle. So that's a parenthesis for that and a bracket. Remember, domain are your x values. So your domain looks like it's going to be between -6 and 5, bracket. Another way to write that, this is how you're going to want to write it in this class, but you can get away with doing -6 is less than x is less than or equal to 5 in some cases, but this is the interval notation that's preferred in this class. Interval notation. So they mean the same thing, but this is how you're going to be asked to write it. Your range are your y values. So we're talking about down to up. So my lowest y value looks like it's at -5. And that's also a open circle. So it looks like at the y value of -5, and then it opens up its very highest y value. Looks like it's at 2. That's included. So between -5 and 2, that's going to be my y values for my domain, -5, comma 2. Also a bracket since the 2 is included. And again, -5 less than y, less than or equal to 2. So that's the domain and the range for you. Let's talk about minimum. Your minimums are, looks like I have spot right about there, and I don't know, I only usually include points at peaks and values. So even if it has a bottom, a very end point there, I don't really count that as part of my minimum or maximum. So that's a minimum. It's a local minimum, it's a relative minimum, and it's at -1, -1. I have a maximum in 2 spots, actually. I have one right here. That's going to be at -4, 2. And here. And that's going to be at 2, 1. So let me write those both down. -4, 2, and 2, 1. Remember that minimums and maximums use coordinates. So we're looking at x comma y. X comma y for those. So those values here, x comma y, we got to identify if they're relative or absolute. This is a relative because there are lower spots over here. Okay, so it's not the overall lowest spot. So this is a relative. These 2 points, this one's the very highest spot. So this is actually going to be absolute, whereas this is going to be a relative max. So this first one here is absolute, and this one's going to be a relative. Let's talk about increasing and decreasing. It's going to be increasing to start. As it goes to the right, it goes up, and it's increasing between -6 and -4. So remember, we're looking at x values there, and we're going to say increasing from -6 to -4. And then we turn it around and we look at decreasing. It's decreasing from -4 until -1. So -4 until -1. Those 2 x values are between increasing and decreasing. This is a decreasing. This one's increasing. So -4 to -1. And then it turns back around and it goes from -1 to 2, increasing again. So we're going to join that with a little u, just means a union. And then finally, it's going to turn back around and decrease. And it stops decreasing, it's a hard stop right at 5. So between -2 and positive, or between +2 and 5, excuse me. So between 2 and 5, again, these are all x values for your increasing, decreasing, positive, and negative intervals. Let's see if I can fit color coding for these. We'll use a couple of different combinations. Hopefully that fits on here. For positive intervals, those are going to be above the x-axis. So above the x-axis, we're talking about, let's see if my x-axis is right here. My positive intervals are going to be, there's one right there. And there's another one right between here. I know it's kind of hard to see there, but notice that positive interval, Let's see if I can use that different here. The positive one is going to be right there between these two values, between what appears to be -5 and -3. And it's also positive. It's above the x-axis between 0 and 4. And your negative interval here is going to be below the x-axis. So it looks like it's below the x-axis between -6 and -5. It's below the x-axis again between what looks like to be -3 and 0. And then it actually dips back below the x-axis over here. Can you all see it between 4 and 5? So that's also a negative interval between 4 and 5. So there's a lot of intervals here. But if you think about it, when it starts off as a negative, right, between -6 and 5, it goes above the x-axis between -5 and -3. Then it goes down below the x-axis again between -3 and 0. It pops back up again over the x-axis between 0 and 4. And then finally, it goes below the x-axis between 4 and 5. So those are all your intervals for example 2. Again, pause the video if you haven't done example 3 and 4, and we'll go over that in a minute. Now I'm going to go over that a lot quicker. All right, check number 3 here. Let's talk about our domain. First, I wrote all real numbers. Now what you want to write is -∞ to infinity because that represents all real numbers in interval notation. And that's because the graph points left and right forever. There are no like values where it cuts off. The range, everything below -1, if you look at the y value here, -1 and below is representing all the y values. Nothing above -1, so we'd say y is less than or equal to -1. Again, we just, it's starting from the bottom, -∞, and then it cuts off at -1, but it includes it. So we're going to do a square bracket. It doesn't have any minimum because it goes down forever. There are points where it bottoms out, but it does have one maximum, and that's right here, and that is the absolute maximum. Okay, so at that point, -2, -1, that's an absolute max. There are no higher points than that. It's going to be increasing right here. So it'll be increasing from the left side forever up until it hits -2. So that's actually increasing from -∞ on the x-axis. Remember, -∞ is coming from the left, and then it stops at -2. So that's your increasing interval. And then it turns around and does the same thing from -2 to infinity. It goes on forever to the right, and it goes down forever to the right. So to the right, remember this is right, not down, it is decreasing as it goes from -2 to the right, decreasing. And this is representing left. From the left side to -2, from -2 to the right side. It doesn't have any positive intervals. Notice that the whole graph is below the x-axis, so there are none. It's all below x-axis. And then the negative interval, well, since the whole thing is below the x-axis, the negative interval is everything. So again, all real numbers, everything is between -∞ infinity, because that captures the whole negative side of that. All right, pause video, try 4. All right, here are the answers to number 4 in the correct notation. The domain is all real numbers. Notice that the arrow goes left and right forever. So it's just going to be all real numbers. Every x value is represented. And notice that it goes up and it points in opposite directions up and down as well. So it's also going to be all real numbers for your y values. Your minimums and maximums. So this is a minimum. It's at your low point, but it's not the lowest point. It keeps going on forever. So it's got a relative min, a -2, -4, -2, -4. It's also got a relative maximum. So that's a peak, but not the highest value. There are higher values over here at 2, 0. Now, increasing and decreasing. It's got one increasing interval in the middle in this sense. So between these two numbers, -2 and 2, that's an increasing interval, -2 to 2. So the decreasing intervals are what's captured over here. So everything from the left side. Remember, the left side is -∞. So -∞ up until it hits -2 is a decreasing interval. But wait, it also decreases over here. So from 2 all the way to the right is decreasing. So it's decreasing here and there. So negative infinity to negative 2 and 2 to infinity. It's got one positive interval, and that's the interval over here on the left side. So the only interval that's actually above the x-axis is over here, and that's from negative infinity again to when it hits negative 4. So that's your positive interval. The rest of them are negative intervals, but it's really two separate intervals because right here it hits 0. So your negative intervals are going to be between negative 4 and 2, because what happens is it hits 0, right? So 0 is not really positive or negative. So just from negative 4 to 2, but then it turns back right around again. So from 2 to infinity, it also is negative as well. So thank you for watching these videos. Hopefully you got a good understanding, be able to do the 1.2 practice on your Canvas page. Thank you so much. Have a great day.